Hello everyone, this is the final part of my series of reviews I've been doing of my recent debate with the atheist personality Matt Dillahunty. As before, I am joined by Dr. Timothy McGrew, Chair of the Department of Philosophy at Western Michigan University, as well as Apologist Richard Porter. In this final installment, we discuss some of the slippery debate tactics employed by Matt Dillahunty. We pick up the debate with Dillahunty's closing statement and then move directly into the Q&A. I trust that you will find this and previous installments instructive and edifying. I will leave links to previous installments of this review series in the description of this video.
And I'm going to turn myself into a liar and take 10 seconds or 15 seconds because I just got accused of not understanding induction by somebody who doesn't understand induction. And during his closing remarks, he mentioned, first of all, that he believes the sources are trustworthy because of the credibility of witnesses. The credibility of the witnesses is evidence for the proposition that the witness is trustworthy. That is the evidence you're leaning on, not the claim. What best explains that claim, when you said that, you said it...
Well, so that first point is incorrect, I think, because the claim itself is evidence. I mean, if 500 people claim to have witnessed an event, that is, most people would say that is strong evidence that the event took place. And so therefore it follows that a single claim must be at least some evidence for that proposition. And then the extent to which a single claim is strong or weak evidence will vary depending on contextual factors such as the credibility or the habitual truthfulness of that particular witness. Anything to add to that?
I suppose we could cook up a situation in which someone's claim was evidence against what he was claiming, but it would be one of those artificial situations that philosophers love to cook up, right? Let's suppose that I have someone who is a congenital liar. Every single time that he makes a propositional claim that we've been able to check up on, it is false. And then he makes a claim. All right, well, now we've got a big, what kind of case? Inductive case, right? That he's probably lying here too, unless we have some other reason to believe what he's saying. So you could construct a case based on your background knowledge where someone's claiming something was evidence against the thing. But those are pathological cases. Those are cases that philosophers concoct just to show that in theory it's possible to do this. In all ordinary situations, including situations where people are claiming unprecedented things, we take the fact that they're claiming these things to be at least some evidence, maybe weak evidence, maybe not strong enough to overcome the presumption against, but some evidence in favor of those claims. Because in all normal situations, if the thing actually transpired, this is the sort of claim we would expect. And if it didn't, then we have some lesser degree of expectation that this is kind of claim that we would have. So yeah, I mean, I think you're on very safe ground, and this is one of those throwaway lines that Matt makes as if he understands what induction is, and then he's just like off and wandering into his favorite fields again. It's very odd.
Yeah, so his claim that it's just, so the testimony only speaks to the trustworthiness of those giving the testimony, right? I couldn't help but think of I just conjured this up, a silly little example. You know, and he brought up his mother earlier, and he said that oftentimes his mother tells him things that he believes that she's not lying about, but that she's just sincerely mistaken about. Now, imagine Matt was sleeping over his mother's house, right? He was in the guest room, and his mother, who he regards as substantially trustworthy, barges in the door in the middle of the night and says, "Matt, there's a fire in the house." You know, imagine him looking up at his mother and saying, "Well, Mom, claims aren't evidence." You know what I mean? Like, show me some smoke. I mean, you know, I know that's kind of a silly example. All analogies break down, but I think it shows the relevant similarity between how similar, you know, how silly that would be and how silly his claim is.
I don't think it's a silly example. I like the example. This is actually good stuff. So yeah, keep going.
Yeah, I mean, that's it. You know, I just, like I said, I think that there's, okay, so maybe it's a decent, I think the silliness is embedded in the actual scenario. Just imagine him looking up at his mother and saying something like that and ask, "No, Mom, produce some smoke," or, you know, show me a lampshade that went up in smoke, or, you know, something like that. You know, claims aren't evidence, Mom. I'm going back to sleep.
I want physical evidence.
Yeah.
A minute ago, You're looking for what best explains that situation. That's not an inductive argument. That's an abductive argument, which is the weakest form of argument, not the strongest. If you're
Stop! He said what?
He said exactly that.
Wait, replay this clip. This is comic gold. Back this up and just replay just those 10 seconds or 15. Yeah, give us 15 or 20 seconds of backing that up and play this again. I gotta hear all the verbal salad he's tossing at us as he's doing it.
because of the credibility of witnesses. The credibility of the witnesses is evidence for the proposition that the witness is trustworthy. That is the evidence you're leaning on, not the claim. What best explains that claim, when you said that, you said it a minute ago, you're looking for what best explains that situation. That's not an inductive argument. That's an abductive argument, which is the weakest form of argument, not the...
Okay, let's stop here because the false claims are getting piled on thick and fast, as is often the case. First, what you said was an inductive case was the case for the historical reliability of the Gospels and Acts, and that's a case built up out of particulars. That's exactly, even in the narrow sense, a case of inductions. There may be abductive moves being made in the course of our getting to those data points, but when you then take the data points and you put them together, yes, that's an inductive case. Point number one. Point number two, what the heck is this about abduction being the weakest kind of... What? What is he smoking? Where did he get that? Keep going with this.
And actually, all historical scientific evidence uses, all historical scientific inquiries use the inductive historical method. Evolutionary biology is predicated on the inductive historical method. So I don't think he wants to go
How
there.
does he think we get the Big Bang Theory? Does he think it's because we've watched universes come into existence over and over and over? What?
Seriously.
All right.
the strongest. If you're going to suggest that I don't understand inductive argument when I pointed out that I did, and I've taught on this stuff before, well, you're actually making an abductive argument that...
But he doesn't understand the weight of an inductive argument, because as we saw throughout the rest of these sections that we've played, every time I would make an argument for the trustworthiness of the Gospels, he thought, as Richard put it, that I was making a beeline for the resurrection, when I was developing a cumulative inductive argument that the Gospels are substantially trustworthy and grounded in eyewitness testimony, and this is highly relevant to evaluating the resurrection claim, in particular, the proposition that the apostles were honestly mistaken in their claim to have witnessed the resurrected Christ. So I don't get the feeling that he does understand the nature of that inductive case.
I don't mind someone's not understanding the varieties of non-deductive argument. I am a little worried about what I think I just heard him say, which is that he's taught this stuff. Who is he teaching this to? Is someone paying him to shed light on these subjects? This is somewhat disturbing.
Yeah, he did. Did he not say earlier that he lectures on the inductive nature of science? Yeah. If it's free, you got ripped off.
Dude.
That is not the strongest. And then trying to claim that claims are evidence. Well, if claims are in fact evidence, then I will claim that claims aren't evidence. And you'll have to accept this under your epistemology as evidence against your claim.
And of course, we're talking about testimonial evidence, and he later revises his terminology to say that propositions are not evidence, which is fair, except that it completely obliterates any relevance to this particular debate.
Yeah, you know, propositions are ways of representing evidence, and we use that representation because propositions have some nice logical properties. You can take the conjunction of propositions. You can negate a proposition. You can set up entailments between one proposition and some target, or between something and a target proposition. You can manipulate these things in logical ways, and that is that's a legitimate way of thinking about evidence. And this is all well known in the literature. This is not something that is like brand new or special to Christian apologists or something crazy like that. I'm not exactly at a loss for words. I may be at a loss for somewhat polite words. So just, man.
The frustrating thing here as well is this closing statement, so I have no opportunity to come back on this, which is really...
Yeah, well, you could do what he just did and say, okay, I lied. I'm going to take 10 seconds. Most of what you just said is false. The rest of it is deeply confused. All right, moving on. Q&A time?
Up into those questions, folks. Thanks so much, Jonathan and Matt, for those closings, and we are going to go to the next one. This one was from Justin Maurer, PhD in Pine Creek Studies. I can't remember. I don't think we read this. Saving this one for you, Jonathan, they said, if the martyrdom claims are the best evidence that the apostles weren't lying, then what is the second best evidence that they weren't lying? And is lying more likely than miracles?
Yes, a great question. The fact that they are substantially trustworthy would be also an evidence against them lying. The fact that they are demonstrated to be habitually truthful through the numerous lines of evidence that bear on the Gospels and Acts and the Pauline corpus. That would also be a strong evidence against...
I'm out here.
In terms of...
So, I mean, you're right in your answer to the second part of the question, but the questioner first slipped in martyrdom claims, not the willingness to endure labors, dangers, and sufferings voluntarily in attestation of the accounts, but actual martyrdom claims. Now, those are two different things, and it's actually the former that we've got excellent evidence for, and the former that is doing the work. It's their willingness to face this as a plausible outcome of what they were continuing to insist upon. Whether, in fact, this or that person was pierced with arrows or sawn in half or whatever, those are claims that come to us in varying degrees of strength, and somewhat some of them are somewhat removed. Sean McDowell's doctoral dissertation was on this, and he turned it into a book.
Right,
so yeah.
And we do have evidence, quite good evidence, for the martyrdom of some of the apostles. Like, we have good evidence, for example, for the martyrdom of James, the son of Zebedee. We have good evidence for the martyrdom of Peter. We have good evidence for James, the brother of Jesus, from Josephus and Hegesippus. And Clement of Rome testifies to the martyrdom of Peter. Also, it's anticipated in John 21 in the first century. And if John was writing after Peter's death, which he almost certainly was, or very likely was, then that it's very unlikely that he would have attributed that prophecy to Jesus in John 21 had it not actually happened in the way he described. So right. You have evidence for some of the apostles, but yeah, earlier in the debate I had used the language of willingness to suffer martyrdom, and I didn't feel it.
Right, and they would just it's a small thing, but I just didn't like the way that the questioner framed the question, because I felt like he was perhaps trying to slip something in.
Yeah, and I just want to comment that I liked your immediate response in the debate, Jonathan, because why are we not, or why are we just out the gate discrediting the actual trustworthiness of those reporting or those collecting the reportage, as opposed to these sort of external things that we can corroborate?
Whether a miracle is more likely than they lied. So the argument that goes back to David Hume, that Bart Ehrman, etc., has championed, would be that you can never infer a miracle as the best explanation, because a miracle by definition is the least probable explanation, and you could never infer as the most probable explanation. But again, I think that if you have sufficient evidence for the resurrection claim, I think you can overcome the vanishingly small prior probability, if the probability is vanishingly small, which I'm not convinced in the case of the resurrection it is. So in the case of the resurrection, I think you can make a case from the what I call the instances of Messianic convergence in the Gospels, which is where you have multiple examples, many examples, where you have coincidences in the Gospel accounts which correspond in some way that seems to be undesigned with the Old Testament. So for example, Jesus' death coincided with the Jewish feast of Passover, which is something which is very well established historically, good evidence for that. And yet, given the theological import of Jesus' death, Jesus being represented in the New Testament as the Passover lamb, etc., which fulfills Exodus 12 and the Passover lamb that's blood was to be smeared on the doorposts of every home to protect the firstborn from the wrath of God. That theological symbolism then is quite, given that theological symbolism, then is quite striking that Jesus' death just so happens to correspond to that date. Another example would be the fact that Christianity becomes the dominant global religion that it becomes, given what the Old Testament says, such as in Isaiah 49, for example, which says that the Messiah was to become a light for the nations or the Gentiles, that God's salvation might reach to the ends of the earth. Until 313 AD, where you have the Edict of Milan, Christianity was a persecuted minority in no position to enforce, the probability of Christianity becoming such a dominant global religion seemed to be vanishingly small for the first few centuries of the church, and yet it did. Now,
pretty soon you must move on.
Let's stop for a minute here. What you're running into here is a rhetorical issue. People like short questions better than they like long answers. It was a very easy thing for your questioner to put this bit, is a miracle more probable than that they were lying. It's a very simple question. You can state the question in a single sentence. You could get it out in 5 seconds. Your answer contains a great deal of pertinent, reasonable information, but it's several orders of magnitude longer than the question. And at this point, 95% of the people listening have tuned out. That's not a problem with the logic of your answer. It's a problem with the structure of the verbal debate scenario. And this is one of the reasons why I just had somebody call me today and say, I'm thinking I should debate Bart Ehrman. And I said, do it in writing. Don't do it verbally, because verbal debates give people the opportunity to do these little maneuvers where you win on points overwhelmingly, even the discussion, but you'll lose the audience. Sam Harris, in his infamous debate at Notre Dame with William Lane Craig, made a deliberate choice to go off topic and just start ranting about how evil God was in the Old Testament. That was not the topic of the debate. That wasn't even germane to the topic of the debate. And Bill knew that. And so he just refused to answer any of the jabs that Harris was sending at him. And in the course of doing that, you could make the case that Bill won the debate but lost the audience. So what this questioner has done is to set up a really quick question. Is it more likely that a miracle has occurred, or that people were lying or were deceived, or some simple thing like that? And the answer is, that's not a question that can be answered apart from consideration of the detailed nature of the evidence. Next question. There just isn't any a priori answer to that question. You may think that there is, but if you do, you're wrong. I didn't even say why you're wrong. I didn't even get into what you're quite legitimately doing, which is saying, well, Hume's argument is set up this way, but the question is so short that under the constraints of the rhetorical nature of the situation, you kind of have to just give a short answer. I'm just trying to be as honest as I can in listening to what you're saying, and I'm tracking with you and going, yep, that's relevant, that's relevant, that's relevant. We're down to 6% of the audience, 5% of the audience, maybe 4% of the audience at this point. Does that make sense to you, Jonathan? I'm not trying to be mean. I'm just trying to see what I see going on as a different dynamic.
No, sure. I'm not sure how to resolve that or do it differently next time. But.
Don't do verbal debates would be one way. But the other way is to steel yourself to giving the extremely short answer that shouldn't be satisfying to somebody who wants the full answer. But rhetorically, you have to say a true but short thing sometimes rather than a true but long thing. I hate that. And that's one of the reasons why I don't seek in-person debates. I got roped into one. I got roped into Actually, pretty much, I've been roped into nearly all of the debates that I've done. I've done 3 with Peter Boghossian, with Zach Moore down in Texas, and with Bart. But I didn't go out looking for any of those. Justin came to me on the 2 that we did on his show. And with Zach Moore, I made the mistake of telling Ezra Boggs down at the Bible and Beer Consortium, sure, Ezra, I'll do whatever you want. And then he said, great, how about a debate? I think it was just chance that Matt wasn't available for that debate, or they probably would have slotted him in. And oh boy, would that have been fun. Mm-hmm. And by fun, I mean, I have some perfectly healthy teeth that I might want to get a root canal on.
To ease the pain.
Yeah. So anyway, that was my thought as I was listening to this. Is like Jonathan is saying way too much true and relevant stuff because he's thinking of what's true and relevant to the question. But the dynamic of the question, is this just me, Richard? How did that strike you?
No, you're exactly right, and I think that I mean, there's a number of there's a number of different cues that someone can take and look and say, oh well, Jonathan's like. So, for instance, I remember, and I'll come back to what you're saying, but I remember thinking to myself, watching Jonathan give his closing statement and making those comments about Matt's inability to understand inductive reasoning. Matt's shaking his head. He's grimacing,
smirking, right? Yeah.
Yeah, and doing these things to some people, at least emotionally, that's going to be compelling to them. It's like, no, that's the bulwark of atheism. Matt Dillahunty. There's no way that he's that wrong, and this Jonathan McLatchie is pointing it out, and so people will tune out. Now, with respect to the long answer, short answer dynamic, absolutely, because the vast majority of people I'd say who are watching this are probably not familiar. Let's say the vast majority of skeptics, let's say, are not familiar with your arguments, not familiar with your cumulative case, probably not familiar with the type of rebuttal you'd give to a Humean argument, and so it's going to take them a little longer to track it. And, you're firing off, like I said, you're like a machine gun. You're hitting the target every single time. But you're hitting the target of the argument, not the audience. And so, like you said, is there a way to remedy that? Yeah, I mean, I think Tim makes a good point and said, you could say something to the effect of, yeah, that takes a lot of unpacking, but just suffice it to say, and give a little one-liner. But no, absolutely, Tim, I couldn't agree more. I might favor the formal debate. I'd say I might like debates like this more than you do, Tim, although I understand your points as far as, how rhetorically effective they are. And I think in general, particularly when you have someone who is all rhetoric, I mean, this entire debate, he answered no claims, no objection, nothing about the historicity of the New Testament. You gave ample detail. He literally answered nothing. He just tried to, he gave his debased epistemology, and that was the closest that we got. And so, I mean, yeah, it's going to seem compelling to the uninitiated.
I'm just finishing. And so, given that the Old Testament predicts that Christianity would become, that Christ would bring the light of God's salvation to the Gentiles, the ends of the earth, the probability of that happening is much more probable given Christianity than given its falsehood. And so, given this theological backdrop, I think that we have a higher probability than atheists would like us to believe for the resurrection.
Gotcha. And Ian YouTubian, thank you for your super chat. Said, Matt, have you ever heard of A.J. Miller in Australia who seriously thinks, quote unquote, that he is Jesus?
Not as far as I know. It's possible I've heard it, but I don't recall. The last question that was asked was about whether or not it's more likely that someone was lying. And I just want to add in my note that I'm not in any way claiming that somebody's lying. However, lying would be more likely than accurately reporting a miracle. Anyway, so yeah, I don't know that. I don't know if you're going to get to this other question, but I know.
Stop right there. Okay. Notice what Matt did. And again, argumentatively, all he did was make a claim, right? So argumentatively, that was nothing. But what he did was he came back and he did the one-liner again. Rhetorically, that's effective. Dialectically, it's nothing. It's merely an assertion. But dialectically is not what he's playing. He's not playing that game. He's shown this entire time. He's not really interested in engaging in the give and take of argument, evidence, thinking things over, talking about alternative explanations. He doesn't want to do any of that at any detailed level, but he just said lying would be more probable than accurately reporting a miracle. That's good rhetorical strategy. Dialectically, it sucks, but it doesn't matter for the purpose to which Matt is deploying it. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely.
So that was actually like a masterclass moment in sleazy tactics. Sleazy, maybe sleazy is too hard of a word. I might use that for some other things, but in the tactic of missing the point, but scoring points while missing the point.
Yeah, and I don't know, you could tell me what you guys think of this, but that sort of militates against what he said earlier with respect to saying the trustworthiness of the testimony speaks to the trustworthiness of the person, not the proposition. But doesn't it work in reverse? What if they are trustworthy, though? What if they're not predisposed to lying, Matt? I mean, like, do these claims just, and it kind of goes back to the claims aren't evident. Do these just echo into the ether, or do they not have some sort of, do they not matter? Are they not significant in some sort of way? I mean, like you said, to him, that's entirely rhetorical. Like, this is just not a man who's really interested in evidence, for sure. I know we've circled back around to that, but I think we're doing it from various angles because he's giving us, he's giving us new material here.
Right, but that little bit right there just struck me as such a contrast with what Jonathan did. Jonathan did everything dialectical but lost the rhetorical moment. Matt did nothing dialectical but caught the rhetorical moment. And so that's a learning opportunity, right? You watch somebody pull that off and you say, oh, that's how he achieves his effects. And that makes it a little bit less of a mystery that so many of his fans think he's always winning. It's not because either he or they know anything about the argument, but he's really, really good at seizing those little dialectical moments.
Address really quickly. Somebody asked why I have a different standard for the Bible than I would for any other historical book. And the answer is, I don't. Any other historical book that was making claims about supernatural events, I would reject those as well.
Gotcha. And thanks for your question. This one is from Natural.
So let's just stop there because that's a kind of an interesting claim by him. Okay. Any other book that was making supernatural claims, I would reject that as well. Notice, there's nothing here about the quality of the evidence by which it is supported because that's not really relevant for him. It's the fact that it makes supernatural claims. That by itself is sufficient for Matt. That's all he needs.
And the fact that the event is a supernatural one, the only relevance that has is that it suppresses the prior. But you can, in principle, overcome a very low prior with sufficient evidence.
Yeah, right, but at that point, he'll maybe give lip service to that, and then he'll say, but you don't have any evidence, all you have is claims, right? And so it's this incredibly slippery movement back and forth between two different untenable claims, and you may lay your hand upon him 5 times, and he'll squirrel over to the other one as though it were a point of escape.
Yeah, I was going to say, okay, what if it's not a supernatural claim, but antecedently highly improbable? Would you fall on that same line of argument, Matt, or is it just this prejudice against the supernatural? Ding, ding, ding.
Yeah, or another way of putting exactly the same point Richard is making. Is it because supernatural claims are improbable, or is it because they're supernatural that you're rejecting them? If it's just because they're improbable, then let's talk about improbabilities and probabilities and evidence. If it's because they're supernatural as a separate thing above and beyond whatever improbabilities may accrue to them, then how is that not just facially begging the question?
Said, Jonathan, you invoked, oh, that's right. Well, since the last question was for you, Jonathan, what we usually do is we give the last word to the original person it was addressing. If you'd like to give a response to Matt, you can. Otherwise, we'll go to the next one.
We can move on.
Gotcha. Natural Legion, thanks for your question. Said, Jonathan, you invoked Luke's reliability as a historian. By that standard, shouldn't we believe miracles of Greek mythology documented by Herodotus?
No, we'd have to look at the evidence. Just the fact that a miracle was claimed in another source doesn't necessarily provide good evidential support for that miracle claim. You have to look at the particulars, and I think that in the case of the resurrection, the particulars are well substantiated for the reasons I gave among others.
Gotcha. Jake, 4D, thanks for your question from Matt.
Okay, so just time out there. I like that answer. You didn't try to recapitulate your evidence. It was tight. It was on the same order of length as the question. It was direct. You could have said much more. You could have repeated a bunch of things that you had already said, but you didn't. That was an effective answer to that question. And there is more to say. I mean, there's all these claims that Carrier has made about Herodotus that actually turn out not to be quite exactly what Herodotus is saying and so forth. But what you did was more effective than it would have been to try to go into any of that. And also had the benefit of being true.
Serious question. They're not trying to troll. They said, Matt, they said, why do you equate anti-theism to global atheism instead of the more common uses like anti-harm or anti-all religion? Yeah, that was all.
I'm not completely sure I understand the question because I don't know what he means by global atheism, but when I use, so Hitchens used to use the term anti-theism as an opposition to religion, and I think that that doesn't fit with the etymology of the word and splicing it together. So I'm in opposition to theism, like I actively reject theism. Whether or not it counts me as an anti-theist under somebody else's definition, I'm not really bothered by it. I really don't care what labels somebody choose. Like, I don't have a big problem with Jonathan. He could say, I'm not a Christian, I'm a follower of Christ, because he's making some distinction about Christian as a label. I'm not saying that you would say that, Jonathan. This is the example that comes into my head because it comes up a lot. So I don't care what somebody calls themselves. And so somebody's like, oh, I'm not an atheist, I'm an agnostic. I'm like, okay, well, I think you're screwing up a little bit there in self-labelling, but you get to do that. I might do a video at some point kind of like on my take on anti-theism, but it's not the sort of thing I care enough about so that if somebody's like, oh, you're wrong about how you're using anti-theism. Okay, I don't care.
Gotcha. And thank you for your question. This one comes in from Brandon Holbrook. Says, is there any verifiable extra-biblical evidence supporting the resurrection, Jonathan?
No, I don't think so.
Gotcha.
That was an easy question.
Roy Stigall. Let's see, this one might be easy too. I think you covered this already, Jonathan, but we'll give just in case.
Let's just take a time out because I understand why you said that there, Jonathan. But of course, that's the correct answer if you're understanding the questioner is asking for direct evidence. Right? Indirect evidence, sure, there's a ton of it. It's the evidence that backs up the things that are direct evidence.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Right. So all the archaeology. So again, I understand how you took it, and it was not unreasonable for you to take the question that way, but it might be effective if that kind of question comes your way again to say, now look, we've got to make a distinction. Right? If you mean, do we have non-Christians directly saying, yeah, Jesus of Nazareth rose from the dead, but of course we're not Christians? No, we don't have that. And the reason we don't have that is that people who were persuaded that Jesus rose from the dead almost inevitably became Christians. And yeah, we've got their reports later, but their reports are not as direct as the reports that we have in the Gospels and the reports that we have from the sermons and Acts and from 1 Corinthians 15 and things like that. Those are, more nearly contemporaneous. They're within the living lifetime and so on, lifetimes of the people who were living witnesses and all that. That's a slightly longer answer. You don't have to go into super detail on it, but I might make that distinction next time if somebody asks you that question and say, direct evidence, no. Indirect evidence, everything I've just cited that isn't from Scripture itself, everything that counts as external evidence is indirectly pertinent, sure.
Right. And I do make allusions at some points to the extra biblical support for the New Testament documents.
Right, but you don't want somebody to just excerpt this little clip and then walk away saying, see, he says all they've got is the Bible, and Matt's already dismissed that as claims, so there you go. Because some of Matt's followers, at least, are going to do that. That's just the direction their brains will go. Anyway, that was a side comment.
Yeah, and I think also, too, if you're if you're just going to respond as you did, like what Tim said, it's perfectly reasonable to take it that way. I don't know if this is, you guys can comment on this. What I've said is no, and that's okay. We shouldn't expect there to be, or, you know, something to that effect. What we have in terms of the biblical evidence is sufficient. Basically just trying to disabuse people of the idea that extra biblical is somehow more important, intrinsically stronger, whatever the case may be. I think you can say little lines, little quips that, they're true, they're rhetorically powerful, and they don't take too much time. Just an idea.
If it could be shown to your satisfaction that the resurrection didn't happen, would you still be a Christian, Jonathan?
Absolutely not. As I said at the beginning of my opening statement, I'm a very staunch evidentialist. So I believe in the gospel because and only because I am persuaded by the public evidence that Christianity is true. And in principle, I would be prepared to change my mind on that conclusion if the evidence were to swing to blow the other direction.
What evidence could ever possibly be presented that the resurrection didn't happen?
That's a great question. I've been asked this quite a bit. And the examples I've normally given and have been presented to you in some of your other debates would be that if you were to find the body of Jesus or something like that. And I get why atheists find that answer quite frustrating, because that in principle, yes, that would falsify Christianity, but how would you ever demonstrate that it was the body of Jesus, right?
Well, we found a body.
Yeah, so I completely agree with you. However, if the arguments I think support the resurrection turned out in the fullness of time not to be as strong as I thought they were, then that would reduce my confidence correspondingly in the resurrection. And I think, in principle, you could make an argument Jesus didn't exist. I mean, Richard Carrier and Bob Price and David Fitzgerald and others have tried to mount that argument. I don't think it works, but in principle, I think you could make such an argument.
I don't think it works either.
Cool.
You and I are in agreement there. I think the one thing is, what if it could be shown that to the extent to which you're convinced that the Bible's account of the resurrection is accurate, would force you into accepting other religious claims as well if you were to use the same standard of evidence.
Sorry, can you repeat that?
Sure. Whatever standard of evidence you've, whatever epistemological foundation you've got that leads you to the conclusion that the reports in the Bible are reliably strong evidence for a resurrection. If it could be shown that if you applied that standard to other religious claims as well, you would be forced to accept them, would that change your mind?
Yes, it would. That would significantly undermine my confidence. Yeah, and typically, I mean, I tend to think worldview is in very similar terms to scientific paradigm or scientific theory. That all scientific theories have anomalous data, but you don't just throw out the whole paradigm because you have some anomalous data. But over time, that anomalous data accumulates, and if you have enough anomalous data that doesn't fit your paradigm, eventually you're going to think, okay, this paradigm might actually be false. And likewise with Christianity, although there were some extreme examples I could think of, in practice, I think that it wouldn't be a single piece of extraordinary evidence that would change my mind, but it would be the cumulative effect of many pieces of independent evidence pointing against Christianity, which in the long run, I think would be sufficient to change my mind.
But now you're back to cumulative evidence. All I was talking about was if it was shown that your foundation, your reasoning, would force you to accept others as well, and you said, yes, you'd accept it. Now that is fundamentally the exact question that I asked repeatedly before you left that you never answered. How can you write off these other claims from religion when they are just accounts as well?
Okay, let's do a time out here for a second, okay? Here's something that I like to do, and again, this is more not so much in the way of commenting on what Matt is doing here as of offering you a sort of strategic move. I like to say, yes, in the same way that it is possible for me to be persuaded that Abraham Lincoln was not assassinated. I'm not holding my breath. I think the evidence is outstanding that he was assassinated, but yeah, in principle, I am persuadable. If you asked me exactly what that would look like, I'd have to say, I'm not really sure what it would look like, but in the end, what it would be is a better explanation for all of the evidence that we have. And that's what I would need with regard to the resurrection as well.
Yeah. And notice how, again, you're trying to employ a cumulative case in the opposite direction, and there's still no appreciation for it. There's still no, okay, well, what if we could pick Luke apart? What if we could find out that he was wrong about peripheral details, or we found out that undesigned coincidences have better explanations than the ones that we have for them, and these sorts of things that we just worked in reverse. Like I gave the example of the concentric circle. If we just kind of retraced and went backwards, well, why not? We're picking apart. Tim, you often when you first introduced me to undesigned coincidences, you often use the analogy of a puzzle. And I think you can use the puzzle analogy for external corroboration as well. Just all these little pieces that fit. Well, what if these pieces don't fit, Matt? What, why would that not detract from the central claims? Why wouldn't it? Of course it would. It just seems commonsensical to say that it would at least make us skeptical about Luke if we found out he got a bunch of peripheral details wrong, or we found out John's gospel was from the 2nd century and it wasn't an eyewitness. Whatever we could do to undermine the case that we actually do have. I mean, why would it not work in reverse? Again, this is just, and also too, this is another point a point in the discussion where he doesn't appreciate types and quality of evidence. All evidence is, it's all got to be equal. What about these other religious claims? Again, giving no room for nuance amongst types of evidence, quality, and so forth. Very frustrating.
It's not like Christianity has some extra physical evidence for it. It's just, here's a bunch of accounts, and here's a bunch of accounts, and you're dismissing others. What is the standard that makes you accept one and reject another?
The particulars of the case and the evidence that's presented. So in the case of the Quran, for example, and debated.
No, okay, stop, because you had a perfect answer there, but now you're going on and you're going to paint that lily, right?
I knew exactly where you were going with that, Tim.
Yeah, just stop with what you said first. And if you want to drive the knife in a little bit, say the details of the evidence that you won't engage with.
Right.
But that's it, and then just stop. Because this is the point where you move from came back fast and hit him right where I should to let me follow up in a way that's going to show again, as if you needed to, because you've done this over and over, that I know what I'm talking about, but the audience isn't going with you anymore.
Yeah, and I actually think, Tim, I think that's brilliant, and I think that if you just give that one-liner, it gives them opportunity to think about what you just said, like, oh, okay, well, the quality of the evidence, the context, whatever your little one-liner is, it gives them a chance, like, well, yeah, maybe he does have a point. Whereas you're going to go on like a Gatling gun, and yeah, you're probably going to lose them at some point. Whereas if you give that little one-liner, you're forcing them to only reflect upon that and chew on it, and take away what they will. So, Tim, as soon as you called time, I knew exactly what well, what you just said. Perfect. Cut it.
Right, you were there. That was it. That was the moment. Just stop now. And again, Jonathan, you would gravely misunderstand me if you thought, which I don't think you do, that I was just like doing this to beat on you or something. I beat up on myself so much after my own debates. You would probably laugh at me. You probably should laugh at me. But I'm just trying to say these are the little things that I think Matt's followers in particular, and he has lots of them. He has a small army of them. They love these little rhetorical things and would be much more unhappy with Matt's performance if you were always just stopping with your own rhetorically concise answers than they were if you went on and they could say, oh, and there he goes, he's talking. Those are words. We don't do words so much. That's where Matt's audience goes. And so this is one of the reasons why debates are difficult contests. It's because not everything's on the same playing field. It's like sitting down to play somebody a game of chess and then you discover that what he really wants to do is kick you under the table. You may be winning on the board, but your shins are getting bruised up while it's happening, and he's having more fun than you are, probably.
Yeah, I think, as the old saying goes, I think that doing a debate with Matt Dillahunty is like trying to play chess with a pigeon. It always just knocks over the pieces and pips on the board and walks around like it's won.
Yeah, that's actually... All right.
I was going to say, I hadn't heard that one, but if pooping on the board wasn't in that line, then it has to be.
Yeah, there it is.
It's funny too. I think that especially in these, sort of the little rapid fire question and answer segments of these debates, the nice little concise answer works too, because I think an honest observer is going to see that you can give a detailed case for or against the evidence. He can't. He's all one-liners, or a collection of one-liners that more or less say the same thing. Incredulity is his argument. But you've already shown that you can give a substantial case for the reliability of the New Testament, none of which was responded to. And now you're just kind of firing back the same way he is. Except what you're saying is right.
In terms of the subject, in terms of the historiography of Jesus, which is what we're discussing today, the Quran claims in Surah 4 verse 157, Jesus was not crucified. And it says he was not put on the cross by the Jews. At least that's a classical interpretation. Although there are other schools of thought that wouldn't agree with that, but that's at least the mainstream interpretation of that verse in Islam. And we have good evidence from the first century that Jesus really was crucified, even if you reject the resurrection. And so, and the Quran was written 600 years later, right? 606 times.
Is that evidence in the Bible or out of the Bible?
I'm afraid we've got to keep moving,
okay,
just because there are a lot of questions left. We do have another one from Royce de Gaulle, maybe relevant in a super broad way. It says, is probability relevant at all after the fact of these alleged historical events?
No.
Oh,
Is that for me as well?
I would guess.
Wait, what?
Oh, I forgot he said no.
What?
Oh, Tim, is your skin crawling right now?
Okay. How do we do any scientific backing up of any claim about the past? Oh, well, there were probably mammoths wandering about this area because we have found some bones in remains of what we take to be ancient tar pits that are corresponding pretty well to mammoth bones that we've found elsewhere. Yeah, that's a probability claim. It's about the past. Of course, after the fact, we invoke probability. We invoke probability both before and after the fact. That's just a bizarre statement. It's so terse, it actually makes me want to say, oh, say more, Matt, say more. Here's some rope. Knock yourself out. Tell me what you want to do with it. Oh, want to wrap it around your neck a little bit and then sort of find an anchor point high up on the ceiling? Okay, Matt, I'm just going to stand here and watch you do that. Tell me more about this.
And actually, if he's being consistent, he has to throw out all of evolution or biology, which is all based on probability. So.
No, it's not, Jonathan, because science. Somehow. But you wouldn't know anything about that, Jonathan, because, I mean, you don't have the right credentials.
Is probability relevant after the fact?
Okay.
I'm not quite sure what he's getting at. I mean, the way that the Bayesian inference works is you have this likelihood ratio, the probability of the evidence existing given your hypothesis, and the probability that.
Okay, all right, stop. You're going somewhere correct, but there's a simpler, tighter way to put it, which is Bayes' theorem doesn't have an arrow of time. Mic drop.
Very good point, yeah.
Your past and present and future aren't components in Bayes' theorem.
I'm writing that down.
Boom.
I'll quote you.
You may quote me.
Of that hypothesis. As long as you have a top-heavy ratio, that is that the product of that ratio is greater than 1, you have evidence for your proposition. And the extent to which it's greater than 1, the more evidence you have. So a Bayes factor of 100, for example, means you have evidence that is 100 times more likely given your hypothesis given its falsity.
And you see what you're doing is saying all this true stuff. And you're saying it fast, so it doesn't feel like you're taking a lot of time. But it's still too much longer than the question. And Matt, though he gave the wrong answer, right? Factually, he's just wrong. Epistemically, he's just wrong. He did it in one word of one syllable. It's this unfair mismatch between rhetoric and dialectic, but that's what we live with.
perfectly legitimate to apply that to historiographical investigation.
Gotcha. And Michael Dresden, thanks for your super chats. We're going to just roll this into one because they're basically, from what I gather, it's kind of the same idea. They said, Matt, you had said that claims are not evidence, and then they said some women claim that men have raped them. Do their claims count, or do their claims alone count as evidence, as well as black people in the U.S. who have claimed that they've experienced racism? Does that, they say, do the claims alone count as evidence?
So I did an entire video about this distinction between claims and evidence. It's not that a claim cannot also be evidence.
Oh, we need that video. We need that video.
Yeah.
So we need to, I'm just going to say, we all, just for the kicks and giggles, need to go and review that video.
That would be fun.
And also for the suffering. Now back him up 10 seconds or so, and let's let him get a flying leap at this again.
Head first.
Claims and evidence. It's not that a claim cannot also be evidence for a proposition. I'm getting ready to do another video about this notion of extraordinary claims. But the question here isn't whether or not it should count as a data point. It's whether or not it should be sufficient to convince. And so the answer to that is essentially no. The mere fact that someone says something.
Stop! 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 He's just undermined his own repeated emphatic smirking claims. That's remarkable. Yeah. Jonathan, how many times in this debate, in your presentations, in your responses to Matt, in your responses to questioners, have you said, I'm making a cumulative case?
Many times.
It's got to be, rare in Lapine if you're a Watership Down fan. Many. It just, I swear, he's got the goalposts set up on some kind of set of segues so that he can just swap them around and move them anywhere he needs them to be moved at the moment. This takes moving the goalpost to a whole new level. Wow. All right.
I mean, and again, it's like, well, but you said, you're right. He's moving the pieces around as he sees fit rhetorically. But again, kind of for our listeners who I'd say who need to grasp the importance of this, it's like, well, what about mounting claims from credible witnesses, eyewitnesses, honest reporters? What about those? That's our point against this silly little one-liner of Matt, which he's used to shoot himself in the foot. I mean, it's fantastic. We got to watch both those videos. That's he's getting ready to do one on extraordinary claims, probably requiring extraordinary evidence. What did you call it, Tim? The argument ad Sagani?
Yeah, the argumentum Sagani.
Argumentum Sagani.
The argument from Carl Sagan.
Not necessarily on its own conclusive enough to show that it did happen. What often happens is that these conversations end up derailing into somebody wants to object to a person offering up their perception of their identity and saying, oh, should we accept that? Yes, because if the subject's about the identity. But if it's, what I'm saying is, if your claim is, in logic, we have propositions. And we don't simultaneously, address a question, which would have two possible answers or more. Instead, we have a proposition. Some God exists. This event happened. This is true. And that, in and of itself, is not evidence for the proposition that is being there. It is the proposition. The proposition itself is not evidence. And what Jonathan did, which I'm fine with, is that, the confidence that we have in the person who's presenting this, that factors in. And you're absolutely right. And the other thing that factors in is how consistent that claim is with the facts that we have of the world. If somebody says they were abducted and anally programmed...
Okay, stop. That's not what Jonathan did. What Jonathan did was to present the fact of the interlockings of the testimony, et cetera, as evidence, not the fact of his subjective warm feelings about Isaiah or Luke, but the fact that we have these claims which interlock in these ways, which is a logical fact about the contents of the claims. That's not your feeling of confidence, and Matt is he's being allowed here to narrate what happened in his own terms in ways that make him seem less wildly unreasonable than he was in fact in the actual debate. So what he just did there is a wonderful example, almost a textbook example, of narrating the debate, which people will take. I mean, when somebody says, oh, this scholar's definition would lead to this black and white thinking, he's narrating the debate. And people who can't track the arguments themselves are likely to just pick up on his narration and say, oh, well, that must be what's going on, and that wouldn't be very good. Matt's doing it here. It's a very unfortunate feature of these debates that this happens, and it happens so fast. Verbally, it just flickers past. And it is almost impossible, unless you are somebody who's a trained trial lawyer or a debater on the level of William Lane Craig, it's almost impossible to catch every one of these really quick verbal asides that slip something in that is illicit. It's just about impossible to do. And Matt is doing it every time he turns around.
Yeah, what exactly was, Jonathan, what exactly was he driving at? Because minimally, all you're saying is that you're talking about the conjunction of propositions. What is he talking about? I'm not sure I understood him when he said that, when he made the point of the proposition is not evidence for the proposition. What is it? What am I missing here?
I'm not sure. I mean, he tried to redefine his terminology as propositions are not evidence, and I'm not sure how exactly what distinction he's drawing here between propositions and claims. I mean, if he simply
almost sounded to me like he was trying to say propositions aren't evidence for themselves.
Right, but that's not the claim. The claim is the claim.
Right.
Testimonial claims are evidence for what's being testified to.
Right.
It's a claim that requires something more than the claim. There are claims that we can just accept at face value because they are bolstered up by the mountains of evidence about the way the world works. If somebody comes up to me and says, hey, I just got a new puppy. Well, I know puppies are real and people have puppies. And so the problem is that we're bad at recognizing how much evidence we are attributing to the claim the instant we hear it. When you hear a claim, you immediately say, is this claim consistent with the facts that I know about the world? And the more consistent the claim is with the facts, the less additional information you would need to provide. If you tell me, I just got a new puppy last night, I'm just going to take your word for it, because the worst thing that can happen is I find out that you're a liar or dishonest or wrong. And that's not going to fundamentally rewrite the world.
Gotcha.
If instead you tell me there's
I'd just like to point out that Matt is, from what I've seen of him, is notorious for doing this. Taking a very simple and mundane example and holding it against a very complicated, nuanced, multi-layered issue like a dead man rising or the truth of an entire worldview or some, even some historical claim, as if these don't have relevant dissimilarities that almost make them, irrelevant. I could have said that a little more, in a more refined way, but you know what I'm driving at. He's just notorious for having these very simple, mundane examples and holding them against not so simple, mundane examples.
This is something Pine Creek Doug does as well, Doug Letkeman. He'll give some example and he'll just outline it. He'll say, well, suppose that I claimed in a book to have died and risen again. Would you believe it?
Mm.
Now, the honest answer is, gee, Doug, show me your book. Let's give people who are desperately concerned to discredit you 2,000 years to do their worst, and then come back and talk to me about the parallels between that and the evidence that we have for Christianity. If you say anything else, and I almost feel like, I'm channeling Greg Kokel a little bit here, but if you say anything else, you're walking into a trap, which is not a dialectical trap. It's not a trap of reasoning, but it's a rhetorical trap. And so Matt, with all these simplistic examples, which he's then going to, like a wax nose on something at Madame Tussauds, he'll twist it any direction that he wants to. Once you've started down giving a certain kind of answer, taking it a certain way, he'll interpret it a different way and try to argue that what you're saying is absurd because you took him one way, and he'll then interpret it the other. This is outstanding street fighting, verbal street fighting. Not good reasoning, but that's not really the name of the game here. The name of the game is something completely different.
Atonement for my wrongs against another facet of that same individual, you're going to have to come with more than a claim. And that doesn't mean that you come with multiple claims, because the plural of anecdote isn't data. And lining up a bunch of different people anonymously to say this is true doesn't mean all of a sudden we have a bunch more evidence. What we have are multiplying claims, not actual evidence. The evidence would be
multiplying claims, not actual evidence. So
he just said that doesn't mean a claim is nothing, but it doesn't establish it by itself. And now he's saying you can't. You're wow.
So go back to my example of Matt's mom bursting into the guest room, telling him that the house is on fire. So it's not more believable if Aunt Edna comes behind her, or his father, or one of his cousins, or his entire.
Or the dog begins barking wildly.
Right. I mean, it's like, okay, Matt. I mean, where are you going with this? It's just, I almost, like you said, I don't want to attribute improper motives to someone, but he will go wherever the wind takes him to sound as if he's making the better point. It just strikes me like that, hearing him and hearing something like that, because that's so stupid, so wrong-headed. But
hey, show me the empty tomb. I hear all my life, I keep hearing empty tomb, empty tomb. Oh, what's the proof of the resurrection? The empty tomb. There is no freaking empty tomb. There's a claim of an empty tomb. Nobody's ever demonstrated, here is the tomb where they put Jesus and now he's not here. That has never happened, and it can never happen unless there's a God that comes down and finds a way to do it. But Christians choose the shorthand. Oh, the empty tomb, the empty tomb. There is no empty tomb. Stop saying there's an empty tomb until you prove it. Produce the damn corpse. That's the issue.
Until you prove it. I think that word means what he thinks it means.
Yeah, right. We've definitely got a Princess Bride moment here, folks.
I mean, show the occupied tomb, Matt. I mean, we could play this game all day. I don't know.
Yeah, show me the videotape of Caesar crossing the Rubicon. Show me the tape. Picture it didn't happen.
Yeah, right.
What you got are claims. Well, yeah, but and Matt will make claims so outrageous that they'll take your breath away. And by the time you've caught your breath, he's rhetorically half a mile down the road and is taking the audience away with him.
Or he's asked you a question.
At which point, as I think I said in a previous review that we did, the only good answer is, okay, yeah, most of what you just said was false. Now, to your question, if you don't start it that way, you've lost your chance to tag what he just did.
Issue with evidence.
So I don't quite understand Matt's answer for that last question. So if a woman claims that she was raped, that's surely evidence she was. I agree that it's not proof that she was raped, but it's surely evidence, right?
No, it's the claim is not the evidence. Now, there's a bunch of things that we take into account with all of that, which includes what we know about the individual, any other physical data and everything else. But merely someone coming in and saying that they were sexually assaulted does not mean that you have reason to conclude that they are, because that.
See the equivocation made here.
That's exactly what I said. He's, as if you just said, you're making a beeline to the rape case. No, you're saying it's evidence, not. Notice he used the definite article, the evidence, as. Oh man, this is.
And I just said one thing. He just said I said the opposite. I said it's not proof she was raped. It is evidence that she was raped.
Literally just said it.
And then he just says, well, it doesn't mean that you have sufficient reason to conclude she was raped. Well, duh, that wasn't what I said.
Oh, man.
Okay, so what he's done is he's conflated two very different notions of evidence. One is E is evidence for H, where E is some piece. It could be a claim, a piece of material evidence, only if the probability of H given E is above some cutoff K. This is called a K-criterion in the literature. 85%, 95%. It's evidence only if the probability of the hypothesis on that bit of evidence is above this level. And the other, which is what Jonathan is using and is the most common definition in the literature, is E is evidence for H if the probability of H given E is greater than the probability of H. That is to say, once we take E as a sure thing, even if we're only doing this hypothetically, right? Well, if we were to know E for certain and no other information that we hadn't already had, then the probability of H would be greater than it is before we know E for certain, and just given what other information we have. He's slipping between those, and he did it there almost explicitly. It makes me wonder if he really just never has got the concept of a cumulative case, because he's never got the concept of this kind of differential where evidence points in a direction without establishing it. He'll talk as though it does, but then he comes around and says things like this that make me think his notion of evidence is just, he's working with the wrong concept, and he can't hear what Jonathan is saying.
In and of itself is not evidence. Now, what we know about their character, their demeanor as they report this, all of those things become factors in weighing the reliability and trustworthiness of that person.
Gotcha. Thanks so much. Next up, appreciate your question from Jeff Soul. Said, "Hi Matt, huge fan. Can both of you steelman the other person's position?"
I can try.
Do you want to go first, or should I go first? I don't mind.
Sure. Jonathan is convinced that the reports in the Bible are from reliable people who are telling the truth, and that the weight of this across a number of different short passages adds up to, we should accept that the most reasonable explanation for these reports is that the events actually happened.
Okay, stop. Yeah. Stop right there. Okay. Two things. Number one, notice what he did. He put it in positive terms and very, very briefly. Points for that, rhetorical points for having put the case positively and very, very briefly. But also, notice something about the way that he did it. He just said, Jonathan is convinced. He didn't say what convinced you, and left it open, therefore, for the interpretation that he's put on it earlier, which is Jonathan is convinced because he kind of likes this whole Christianity thing, and for no better reason than that, it makes him feel warm and fuzzy. That's how his listeners are going to hear it. He didn't say that, but by just saying Jonathan is convinced that these people are reliable, etc., he did that. Now, also, he set up here a rhetorical trap. If in steelmanning his argument, however you do that, you take significantly longer than he just did, which was all of 10 seconds, 15 seconds. If you take significantly longer than he did, then people are going to say, oh, tuning out now. And so you are, by letting him go first, you're kind of locked into doing something along the lines of what he did and at about the speed that he did it. Also, what he did wasn't a real steelmanning. Steelmanning is taking somebody's argument and making it stronger, at least to the best of your ability to do that and in your judgment. He didn't really steelman your argument, just summarized it. The question was, can you steelman each other's arguments? So if you're going to try to do that, Now you've got a double burden. You have to do something he didn't even actually try to do. And you have to do it at approximately the span of time that he did it. And the whole while that you're doing that, you've got niggling at the back of your mind the question, should I take some of my valuable time before the moderator just moves us on to say, yeah, so there's this problematic aspect of the way that you just did that, Matt, and then your time is over. So this is a really, really difficult situation to be put in. So here, let's just do this as a test. And Richard, I'll let you go first. We're going to drop you into this Q&A section. Matt has just done that. What do you do now? I mean, the mic's turned on, and you've got. So let's give you half a minute to say something in this context, responding to that question, following on Matt's just having said that. And what do you do?
Well, I think first I immediately would go to something you already said. I'd say, well, that's not really steelmanning. That's more of a short, poor summary, if I do say so myself. And then I would probably proceed to try to steelman his position if I could even do that. You know what I mean? But I would, me personally, I wouldn't let him get away with that as a steelman. Even if it was short, I understand that there are constraints, but if you drop me in that situation, just personally, that's how I'm wired. That's immediately what I thought of. I was like, well, that was very poor. I'm sorry. Because I know, Jonathan, I don't remember exactly what your answer was or your steelman of his position was, but I know it was more charitable. I know that it was more thorough, I think, than that. And for better or for worse, I mean, I know that, Tim, you talk about, carrying on too long, how you lose the crowd, even though you...
Yeah.
Yeah, but...
Sorry, good.
No, that's it. Go ahead.
Or maybe what I should have done is said, well, if we're going to steelman your position, make it stronger, first of all, we have to clean up this epistemological train wreck.
Sure.
I like that. And that I might be inclined to say, here's a possible answer, and maybe not the best answer, okay? But a possible answer would be, I find that really difficult to do because I think Matt's badly confused about evidence. So that's really, really hard. To steelman that, I'd have to go back and produce something that would not recognizably be like anything that he has said tonight.
I also wanted to make a point, too, about the content of what he said. And again, I understand there are time constraints and so on and so forth, even though I can't picture, even if he had 5 minutes, that it would have been a more, contentful, moving summary of your case. But he just sounds like, I kind of said something like this in our last discussion. I want to go back to it. He kind of sounds like he's conditioned to respond to a sort of minimalistic case. And let me explain why. Because what he just did, I think, summarizes the case well if all you're going off is criteria. It's very abstract, right? But the type of case that Jonathan has made or can make, I don't think he was given, he didn't give the full swath of the evidence. He gave a nice, short, concise summary. Or, the case of our historical apologist friends is detailed. It actually situates these people, these events, space-time history. That's one thing I love about your wife's work, Tim, is she's so brilliant at making history come alive. We can't think of these things, these events, and you as well, Jonathan. We can't think of these events, these details, and analyze them, put them through the logical rigors of just the abstract. We have to think about, the topography of first century Palestine, or, it probably hasn't changed too much, but you know what I'm saying, or the numismatic evidence, what was actually circulating. And I say, going back to what Lydia does so brilliantly, I think, particularly grab you guys a copy of The Mirror, the Mask, put a little plug in there, is making history come alive. I don't think he's conditioned well to think of stuff like that, to think of these events as actually having happened or even possibly actually having happened, or the place that they happened in, because all of that matters. Thinking about history, in the sort of stream of tradition, whether you agree that everything happened, something happened. There was a man named Jesus. He had some followers. Now, let's fill in those details. Whereas I think that his answer, it just seems like a conditioned response to being kind of beaten over the head with criteria, weighing Jesus' sayings based upon these arbitrary criteria, which I don't think, is all bad, but a lot of it is. I don't know what you think of what I had there, Tim, or if you agree, or you, Jonathan.
No, I see your point that what he's doing is trying to summarize a case that's different from the case that you made. I still don't even think it's maybe a great summary of that, but it bears little relation, at least taken the way I think Matt wants to take it, to what Jonathan was saying about the details and the texture of the evidence. This isn't just I'm persuaded of, or I am convinced of this because I kind of have a bias in favor of Christianity. It's, again, show me the undesigned coincidences in the Hadith, and I will be interested. I will take that as evidence. Show me the external corroborations for the claims of the Quran, and I will be interested in that. I will take that seriously. Show me the historical, archaeological evidence for the Book of Mormon, and I will take that seriously. I will engage with it. But he can't, because he doesn't have anything of the kind for any of these.
Okay, so my steel manning of Matt's position is that a miracle is always the least probable explanation of an event, and we always want to infer the most probable explanation of an event, and so we can never, in principle, infer a miracle as the best explanation of an historical event. Furthermore, the Gospels and the accounts that we have in the New Testament are hearsay. They're composed by anonymous authors, and that claims are not evidence, and all we have in the New Testament is a bunch of claims. I think that's a fair steel manning of Matt's position.
Except the first part's completely wrong.
Okay, sorry.
I think that was a good response, but regardless of what he says, I think that was a very good response because you were more generous than he was. And I don't even remember whatever the heck he says next, but you were more generous than he was. You were dead on, in my opinion, mostly. And you
actually improved his argument.
Yes, yeah. You didn't just brush it off. You didn't seem like you were just trying to get the steel man over with the way he was. He gave you the courtesy of 7 to 10 seconds or whatever it was. Yours was well constructed, thought out, a little bit longer than his because you made a real attempt. So I think that was a good response. Very good.
And actually, he said, at least he said in certainly other debates, I'm not sure if he said it in this one, but he said in other debates exactly what I just said, that a miracle by definition is the least probable explanation, and as historians we're looking for the most probable. So that is what he thinks. So I don't understand why he contests this. I'm pretty sure he says it in the McLachuna debates.
I think you're exactly right.
So let's see what he says.
The New Testament is a bunch of claims. I think that's a fair steel manning of Matt's position.
Except the first part's completely wrong.
Okay, sorry, clarify for me.
So you started off by saying that my position involves a miracle is always the least likely explanation. I didn't say that today. You did. As a matter of fact, I didn't talk about an explanation for the resurrection at all. My position, when you're having a debate, this is the same thing that Michael Kona did. When you're having a debate about, is there good evidence for the resurrection? That is, did the event happen? Not, what is your explanation for it? I didn't talk about, miracles or how unlikely they were. All I talked about is there evidence for the resurrection? If there was sufficient evidence for the resurrection, I would believe the resurrection occurred, and I still would not know how it happened. We would need evidence for the how separately. So to begin steel manning my position by talking about how I'm just rejecting miracles out of hand is actually not a steel man in my position.
So help me out here. Did Matt talk about miracles and the supernatural having any epistemic relevance during the course of this debate?
Yeah, over and over. That's why he said if you've got any other supernatural story, he would reject that too.
Yeah, and didn't he also reference the Lacona debate where Lacona tried to bring up other supernatural claims and near-death experiences, and he said that that's irrelevant?
Mm-hmm. Yep. So
Right?
yeah, you're exactly right. So he's one of the major points that he's made in this debate is that the fact that the resurrection is a supernatural occurrence has epistemic relevance, and so I don't understand why he wants to contest this now. And also he made another point. Let me just back up a minute here. Trying to remember what this other point was.
Position by talking about how I'm just rejecting.
Oh yeah. So he wants to say that that the cause of the resurrection has to be adjudicated separately from whether the resurrection actually happened. And Michael Acuna actually goes along with this. He said explicitly in the debate that you can, as an historian, you can determine that the resurrection happened and just leave the cause undetermined. I don't think that you need to say that, because we would argue, I think, that God raising Jesus from the dead, as opposed to him rising from the dead by some other means, has a much higher prior probability than any other cause of that, because of the theohistorical context, as Will and Craig would put it. Anything to add to that?
Yeah, no, I think you're just exactly right. You know, the theo-historical or the religio-historical context matters here, and like you said, the prior is way higher for the notion, the idea that God raised Jesus from the dead. So, you know, why would we track off in another direction? That's not, you know, that's not what we're contending with, and that goes to that speaks to making sure we're precise about the context of evidence.
Acting miracles out of hand position.
Gotcha. We have to, let's see. We have to keep moving. I hate to do that, but let's see. Jeff, let's see. We've got that one. Thanks for your question, Jake 4D, who says, non-deliberate coincidences not only unprovable, it's unlikely as the Gospels copied off of each other. I think that would be a challenge to you, Jonathan, on given that they're saying the Gospels copied off of each other in the wording, at least the way they worded it.
What was the
Okay, stop. Yeah, go ahead and rewind James's saying the question, because the person can't even get the word undesigned right.
We have to keep moving. I hate to do that, but let's see. Jeff, let's see. We've got that one. Thanks for your question, Jake 4D, who says, non-deliberate coincidences not only unprovable, it's unlikely as the Gospels copied off of each other. I think that would be a challenge to you, Jonathan, on given that they're saying the Gospels copied off of each other in the wording, at least the way they worded it.
What was the first part of the question?
If I could for just a second, since this is one.
If you've got a 5-second response, better yet, if you could do it in 5 words or less, how would you do it? I got a 2-word response. Not here.
Sorry, I don't understand that. Say that again. Not here.
Not
Gospel,
here, as in not in that
Gospels
particular
copied
instance.
off of one another. Not here.
Oh, okay, right.
Yeah, right. Yeah, that's what I thought you were saying.
Yeah.
All right, let Matt now go. Since this is a question for Jonathan, he's going to stick his oar in. Okay, go.
Right, naturally.
And it's one that I may not have much of a dog in this fight. Can I just mute and go to the restroom real quick while Jonathan answers? Thank you.
That's the best thing he's done all day. I'm just kidding. We can take that out if you want.
Which meant that, unfortunately, he didn't hear the answer to this question, because he might have learned a few things, but...
Probably not.
Oh, I would say, very bold of you to assume.
That again for me. The first part of the question.
Let's see. So they said non-deliberate coincidence is not only unprovable, it's unlikely as the Gospels copied off of each other. I think they're saying it's against your designed coincidences argument.
Yeah. So obviously there's a literary dependency between the Gospels, especially the synoptics. The extent to which John is dependent on the synoptics is an item of debate among New Testament scholars. I personally lean towards the view that John was in fact dependent to some extent on the synoptics. But I don't think it undermines the argument for the following reason, that we have the interlockings between the Gospel accounts are casual and subtle. So to take another example, in John 6, verse 5, we have the setup for the feeding of the 5,000 miracle, and Jesus asks, where should we?
And this is where you're losing them. This is where you're losing them, because at best they're going to say, yeah, so we already heard all that before, and if it didn't persuade Matt, then I don't get it. This is where you need, again, a shorter, punchy, or just not here. Or, yeah, that won't work for undesigned coincidences. Full stop. I know, it's galling, right? Because you feel like I should give an example that shows that I'm not just contradicting you. But if he got this far, allegedly heard all of the examples that you already gave in your positive presentation, and he's missed the point this badly, then the reasonable thing to do is to say, no, you just missed the point. And leave it there. It's okay to do, and it may seem rude, right? It feels a little bit rude to say, no, you just missed the point. But this is the rapid fire segment. And in the rapid fire segment, you need to be willing to be ruthless here when somebody is missing the point that badly. That's my 2 cents.
Although this was an audience question, so I can.
I know. It's not Matt. It's an audience member, but the audience member is missing the point so badly, and then coming in and making a claim, which isn't even really a question for you, because he doesn't know what's going on. You don't have an opportunity to engage with him because he's not sitting there getting ready to speak back. He just got his super chat thing in and he's gone. He probably thinks he just dropped the microphone. So this is the point at which you say, okay, no, you just don't get it. That won't work here. Okay. That explanation won't work for these. It's not that it's dialectically irrelevant for you to review one of these for him, but you're treating him like somebody who can learn from it. And somebody who actually heard your presentation already, has heard multiple examples of this and didn't get the point. Going through it again probably isn't going to fix it.
And I thought at this point that, okay, here's just an opportunity to give another example, and then
I get that, but again, the dynamics of the situation probably would be better served by you just saying, okay, no, actually that won't work. You obviously have failed to understand what an undesigned coincidence is. It's precisely not an instance of copying, right, and not something well explained by copying. Next.
Yeah, maybe encourage them to go back and listen to it a little bit more closely, in a non-derisive way, obviously.
Yeah,
but
if you can finish that.
In an honest way, just like, well, no, if you go back and listen to my case, you'll understand why they're not deliberate.
Jesus turns to Philip and he says, where do we send people to buy bread? Which raises a natural question in the mind of the audience. Why does he turn to Philip here? Well, if you flip over to John 12, we learn just in passing, it's incidentally mentioned that Philip is from the town of Bethsaida. In Luke chapter 9, although Luke doesn't mention Philip in that context at all, it does mention that the event of the feeding of the 5,000 took place in Bethsaida. And so by putting the pieces together, even though that's never spelled out as to why Jesus turned to Philip in John 6:5, when you put the pieces together, now we understand, we have an explanation for why Jesus turns to Philip in John 6:5, because he's a local guy and knows the shop started by bread. And these seem to fit together in a non-deliberate way. It's not that John is reading Luke and he sees that the event's in Bethsaida, and so he picks Philip, but doesn't even mention that the event took place in Bethsaida, and then he hides in an unrelated part of John's Gospel 6 chapters later that Philip is from the town of Bethsaida. And so it's the casualness and subtlety of these interlockings that provides support for historicity.
Gotcha. Thanks for your question.
Completely correct. Just too long.
Right.
So totally right. Just too long for the questioner. All right, next.
Let's see. Got that. Smokey saying, thanks for yours. Not really a question. Next up. Stupid Whore Energy, thanks for your question, said, we do see the pattern of Luke and Matthew editing Mark's material, such as Mark 2:14. That's a challenge to you, Jonathan.
Mark 2:14. Sorry.
It's funny because you and I are both looking that up.
So Mark 2:14, as he passed by, he saw Levi, son of Alphaeus, sitting at the tax booth, and he said to me, follow me, and he rose and followed him. And sorry, what was the point he was making, that Matthew and Luke copy that?
You're right. Or I think that they were maybe even adapting it or changing it.
That they edited.
there's no contest that there's a literary dependence between the synoptics. So I don't know why he's bringing that up. And I'm not sure of the relevance of the debate either.
Gotcha. That makes two of us. Hey, Jonathan and I are in violent agreement there.
Brian Stevens, thanks for your question, said, when someone says naturalism is a problem, wouldn't non-magicism be a problem too? Magic explains everything we have questions about just as well as the supernatural.
No, it doesn't. Magic explains nothing. We explain things, we explain the unknown, the things that we don't understand. We explain those by appealing to things we do understand. You can't solve a mystery by appealing to a bigger mystery. And it's not, let's not pretend that there's any explanatory power in, how did I do this? And someone says, it's magic, because there's zero explanatory power there.
Gotcha. And thanks for your question. This one's
Ooh, okay, so, I mean, let's stop for a second. Because there's actually something rather funny here. The statement about not explaining something that's mysterious by appealing to another mystery. Okay, Matt, talk to us about quantum mechanics. Talk to us about how quantum mechanics explains things. We often explain the familiar, right? I have a DVD and I hold it up to the light and tip it in various directions and colors shine off of those little grooves in it. And I explain them in terms of, holy smokes, it's not Newtonian physics, it's quantum mechanics I use to explain those colors, which is a lot further from the familiar than the sheen of colors off of a CD or DVD. So this is just a simplistic statement that turns out to be, at best, not really very helpful, and at worst, false.
Yeah, that's a good point, Tim. I always liked Sean Carroll, and he was on the Joe Rogan podcast, and he gave a very interesting way to explain the way we understand quantum mechanics. He said, we understand quantum mechanics about the same way the average person understands their cell phone. They know how to use it. We can get around and do some cool things with it, but does the average person really understand the science and technology and the engineering behind it? No, they don't.
Right.
Bothell Guy, thanks for your question, said, Jonathan, Greek religion says that Dionysus rose from the dead. We have records of that in religious texts. Jonathan, did he raise because we have reports in their book? And Matt, let's see, can you point out the fallacies in the question for Jonathan? I think they meant maybe like the fallacies in like the charge of inconsistency that came up earlier in the debate. Jonathan, we'll give you a chance to respond to whether or not Dionysus rose from the dead.
Yeah, so as I said, it's not just the fact that the resurrection is claimed in the New Testament, it's that we have, it's the particular nature of the claims. So just the fact that it's claimed in some ancient source that so-and-so rose from the dead, that doesn't really tell you anything. You have to look at, okay, are these sources which are credible historically, that they're substantially trustworthy? Are they close up to the facts? Are they habitually truthful and reliable sources of information? And do they go back to people who were eyewitnesses? And in the case of the resurrection, I think that we do have those. But in the case of Dionysus and figures in other religions, I don't think that we do.
Gotcha. And Jake,
I think I was just going to say that the only distinction that I can find is that one of the two stories became more popular and was spread more than another. That's the primary distinction. Is that
okay.
More people.
So, yeah.
Oh boy.
There's a whole bunch of different ways to do this. Sorry, my camera is bobbling up and down, so I've turned off my video. There's a whole bunch of different things to say here. One thing is to say, when were those sources written that you're referring to, and how long after the event was supposed to have taken place? Talk to me. And what are those sources? Quote them. Which the person can't do because he's just asking a question and then they're moving on, right? But if it were any kind of more substantial interaction, I would say, let's have it. Give me the dying and rising god Dionysus story, and let's talk details. And Matt's going to say, now the only difference is that one of them caught on and the other didn't. But of course, there are all kinds of other differences, as we all know if we've done our Zeitgeist Horus dying and rising gods thing. And I have found at a certain point, because people will bring this up who don't know anything about it, the thing to do is just to say, talk to me about that. Give me the details. Are there undesigned coincidences among those accounts? If so, what are they? Where are they written down? Show them to me. and they can't. I literally sat at a restaurant with a nice guy who had been a Christian and then he lost his faith. And as our hamburgers were arriving, he leaned forward to me and he said, "So, have you ever read the Egyptian Book of the Dead?" And I said, "Yes." And he said, "Oh." And that was the end of that line of the conversation. A lot of people think they're clever because they've heard somebody say that some source says something, and they've never read it for themselves. They have no idea what it's like. They have no sense of the contrast of the evidence for Christianity and the evidence for these kinds of claims. And Matt is going to go on right now and reinforce this guy's sense that, yep, there's really nothing to choose between them except that Jonathan likes one and he doesn't like the other, or one of them became more popular and the other one never really caught on. That's how Matt's going to ride that horse.
And
Yeah, it's sort of baffling to me why you can't at least try to be an objective observer, take a step back and say, okay, well, maybe there's a reason why one caught on and the other didn't. It couldn't possibly be because of the intrinsic strength of the evidence for one and not the other.
I love it.
I mean, that's just ludicrous, right? I mean, far be it from me to suggest something so crazy, right? Oh.
Well, had accepted the Dionysus thing, and also there's the notion of when more and more people began to write things down as opposed to just telling stories. There's a number of reasons why that's the case, but at the end, I will agree. There's a better case for the resurrection of Jesus than there's for Dionysus, just in the sense that there's more potential reports about it. But the question is, it's like saying I'm the smartest village idiot. It doesn't matter that you have more than a worse claim. The question is, do you have enough for this claim to be justified? Do you have strong evidence, which I clearly think today we have not seen strong evidence. But is it, even if you had strong evidence for the resurrection, that's still a separate issue from, do you have sufficient evidence to warrant accepting a resurrection?
Gotcha, thank you. And Jake, let's see.
And to answer that other guy's question, no, I'm not going to sit here and go through every question that's being asked of Jonathan and point out fallacies if that's what they were asking, because we're almost off the clock here.
and all the fallacies are Matt's as well.
Jake 4D, thanks for your claim. They said claims are evidence. They just happen to be better evidence for someone making a claim than the event itself. Still evidence, just weak evidence. I think they're challenging your position on claims and evidence, Matt.
Okay, I have $1 million. Is that evidence? They're not going to answer. It doesn't matter.
Gotcha. And let's see.
Okay, let's stop there. This is actually fun.
There's one of his little mundane comparisons again. Gotta love it.
Right, and so this goes back to what I said earlier about there being little pathological cases we can construct where we know that someone's a liar or we know that someone's not serious, as we know here that Matt's not serious, right? And we say, okay, he's obviously trading on the fact that his claim doesn't prove that he's got $1 million, and also tacitly on the fact that we know he's not serious and we know he's just making this claim because he wants to demonstrate what nobody ever doubted, which is that merely making a claim about something like that doesn't guarantee it. We get that. We know that. But is it evidence? You know, Matt, if you weren't just in the course of trying to be funny here, if we thought that you were serious, we might wonder whether you're misguided. But yeah, it would be some evidence, maybe not enough to persuade us that you got $1 million though. Maybe just to make us a little less sure that you don't have $1 million, but that is one of the things that evidence does, is to make us a little less sure that the claim is false. So yeah, this is I mean,
you know, to be fair to that, I mean, it's not necessarily standalone. I mean, we could look at him. He's got a nice pair of eyeglasses. He's got a nice computer with sound quality. You've got a nice computer chair, gaming chair, whatever that is. You've got some money, Matt. Maybe you do have $1 million. Maybe that is evidence. You know what I mean? So it's
not even all that outrageous a claim.
Right. I mean, you know, you're well, right, exactly.
John Robertson, thanks for your question, said, what historical evidence for the resurrection would you consider necessary and sufficient to compel belief? I think that, I don't know who it's for. You guys have a guess?
That's for Matt.
I suspect it's from that.
I do too.
Yeah.
And my answer is, I don't know. I don't have any other resurrection claims to compare it to. It's like saying, hey, here's something that you have no evidence for that's never occurred in reality in an identifiable way. What sort?
No evidence for.
Yeah, that's not prejudiced at all.
Yeah, I think what he means is insufficient evidence. But.
Right.
But what he can't see for him, if he's using what I call a K-criterion, right? It's got to meet this probability bound, or it doesn't count as evidence. Then that's for him. That's the same thing, right? That's because that's what he means by it. So that's the only way he can hear it.
So on that definition of evidence, Tim, presumably you could have multiple pieces of evidence which are sufficient to bring the probability of your hypothesis above that threshold. And do none of those individual pieces of evidence that contribute to that cumulative case count as evidence by that definition?
Right. So you got a bunch of things that aren't evidence, which have the net result that their conjunction is suddenly, on this definition, evidence. Okay, I guess. Ish.
What sort of evidence would convince you of it? I don't know. What sort of evidence would convince someone of a black hole? At the point where black holes were just speculative, I'm not even sure that the people who were talking about it could have identified, here's the evidence we need. But when the evidence appears and is presented, and there's a demonstrable causal connection tie between the evidence and the claim, that's when it becomes compelling. To pretend that I need to have an understanding.
There's no causal connection between the claims in the New Testament and Jesus actually rising?
Not one that he will admit as demonstrable.
Right.
But that's all. All you've got there is his own personal incredulity. This is being used as an argument.
Oh, yeah. Wow.
Everything that would convince me about everything, or I don't have a sound epistemology, is asinine. What I need is to be open to becoming convinced. And my question throughout this entire thing has been that if I were to accept the New Testament account, what other accounts would I have to accept? How far will I have lowered my standards of evidence so that I would have to also accept?
How many times have I answered this question? I've answered this over and over again, that you have to look at the specific particulars of the case. And
when you do, there won't be anything else that's in the same ballpark. Thank you.
And they're all the same to him.
Competing claims. And I think it's just a laundry list of crap.
Gotcha. And Stitches, thanks for your question, said, Matt, what do you think of the Satanic Temple?
I think they're a really good ally in supporting church-state separation cases because it demonstrates the hypocrisy of a primacy of Christianity as a de facto religion within, the United States, the Western world, and other things like that. I have problems with the name. Don't get me wrong. I agree with them on a bunch of things, and they're vastly better than the religions that would disparage them.
Gotcha. And John Robertson, thanks for your question, said, Joseph Smith versus Paul, how do you distinguish between who is lying, honestly, mistaken, or telling the truth? I think that's for you, Jonathan.
How do you distinguish between someone who is lying, mistaken, honestly, or telling the truth? Through the methods that I outlined in my opening statement. I gave arguments. So that's what my whole opening statement was about, was providing. And it's not that each of the individual lines of evidence are proof positive in my rejection of each alternative hypotheses, but rather they provide evidence. And as we add more and more evidence, it provides more and more support that confirms the falsity of the alternative hypotheses.
Okay. Right. I think he was asking specifically, how do you tell as between Joseph Smith and the Apostle Paul? I don't think he was asking an abstract question.
Yeah, I think I missed the start of that question, but Joseph Smith, of course, was a convicted charlatan, so that doesn't bode well for his credibility.
Okay, right. So I like that answer. I also like the answer that says Fanny Young, Melissa Lott, Almira Woodward, Desdemona Fulmer, Rhoda Richards, Elvira Cowles, Sarah Lawrence, Lucy Walker. How many more did you? Oh, Helen Kimball. Did I forget her? And I'm only starting. There are 40 of these. That's one of the ways I distinguish. Joseph Smith was in it for the sex. Can we move on?
Yeah, exactly.
That's about what the answer deserves. The question deserves.
Yeah. Joseph Smith had clear motivation. He was a pathological liar. There's just so many evidences that discredit Joseph Smith's testimony. And if you look at the Book of Mormon, it's set in Fantasyland.
I completely agree, but I say we just start with 40 wives. Next question. Again, you see the rhetorical thing coming in here? Like, keep it short. Keep it super short.
Hypothesis, the first hypothesis, the hallucination hypothesis, and therefore, since that redistributes the probabilities, that supports in turn the resurrection hypothesis.
Gotcha. Thanks so much. Want to let you know, folks, I just realized, has it already been 2 hours and 20 minutes? Is it just, whoa, okay, I'm really sorry, guys. This is longer.
We started a couple minutes late and we did a few minutes without Jonathan, but yeah, it's been that long.
Whoa, okay, so sorry, guys. I definitely gave you the impression it wouldn't be this long. So folks, want to let you know, we can't take any more questions. We're going to try to finish up really fast, less than 10 minutes. We're going to try to get through the rest. And so please do me a favor, don't send any more questions. We won't be able to get to them. I just realized I was thinking it's been like an hour and 20 minutes, and it's actually been 2 hours and 20 minutes. But thanks for your question. Let's see. Next, Sentinel Apologetics, thanks for your question. Said, Matt, there are tons of Second Temple studies showcasing the thorough backdrop of the New Testament and Greco-Roman context that showcases its true historiography.
Cool, nice claim. Sorry, you couldn't ask a question.
Next up, Dominic Deinstuber.
Now, that's an interesting response. Just stop right there. Notice what he did. Somebody is making a claim which is in fact correct, which completely undermines the stance that Matt's been trying to take about the documents, which is they're just a bunch of claims. I don't care. So what does he do? Now, rhetorically, this is really savvy. With a little flick of the wrist, he says, nice claim, and then not a question, and then he moves on. So, yeah, if he were to try to engage with that, or even engage with the fact that there are a lot of scholars who are not themselves particularly conservative or even Christian, but who say, yeah, well, of course, this backdrop is very well established, he just brushes it off with a little bit of a wink and a nod to his audience. It's very effective. It's really effective. I'm not even saying he doesn't have a right to pick and choose which non-questions he wishes to engage with or not engage with, but the way that he did that was just, it was of a piece with his, I'm not going to get caught in this whole evidency thing because that's not my bag. So he, with a little bit of verbal cleverness, he just brushed it right off.
Said, if you write a dogmatic book about your religion, would you write about your witnesses to be trustworthy, or would you claim that they are a fraud?
Stop. Stop. The claim isn't, oh, I claimed that they were trustworthy witnesses in my gospel. It's not like Mark said, this witness was trustworthy. Right? We have one place in John 19 where somebody says, and he that wrote these things saw, and we know that his witness is true, and so that's it. But the kind of evidence that Jonathan's been bringing up over and over again is not somebody claimed these guys were trustworthy. It is, we can see their trustworthiness by the texture of the evidence, by its interlocking with other testimony that we have, with outside sources, and so forth. So it's just a failure to understand even the basic nature of the argument that Jonathan is making. And I think that this is just something that we're seeing here as just a sort of almost a microcosm of the whole debate.
That's actually John 21, not John 19.
Oh, I'm sorry. And what am I thinking of in John 19 then? I should look that up.
You're thinking about when the soldier pierces Jesus' side, and it says that that the author observed the event, and he bears witness that it's true. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, the man who saw it has, I'm thinking of 1935. The man who saw it has given testimony, and his testimony is true. He knows that he tells the truth, and he testifies so that you may also believe.
Right, yeah.
That's what I was thinking of.
Yeah, cool.
I guess we could both answer it.
You won.
It's a strange question because I'm not arguing that the gospel authors are reliable because they claim to be reliable. Of course, that would be an absurd argument. And claiming that there's good evidence that they're reliable because on the points that we can cross-check, they actually prove themselves to be close up to the facts and get a lot of information correct, which then provides from a fascinating reason for trusting them even in those instances that we cannot directly cross-check.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
And
within
I like that answer, but I would just have done one thing differently if I had been fast enough on my feet to do it. It's always easier to do the Monday morning quarterback thing than it is to do it on your feet. But the one thing that I would have put slightly differently is not just that they get things right that we can check, but they get hard things right.
Mm-hmm.
It's a small variant on it, but just throwing that in gives you just that little increased bit of leverage.
Right.
Yeah, and just for the listener too and this is why I really thank Tim for this encouragement many years ago. This is why I encourage you to read old scholars, read the historical apologists that Tim and Livy are always pushing, for the simple fact that you'll learn to really, really appreciate tiny little peripheral details as compelling. You'll understand them, appreciate them in that way. And read Colin Hemer.
Absolutely.
Oh, please read Colin Hemer.
Yep.
Of a too perfect theory. Like, James, if I were to ask you to name any card in a deck of cards, what would you name?
The Jack of Spades.
Jack of Spades. Now, if in fact I were sitting here holding a card off to the side and moved it over in there, and it happened to be the Jack of Spades, that trick would fall flat because of the too perfect symbol. Ooh, nice, you can see the green screen. It's too perfect that you named a card and it happened to be the card I was holding, and so it leads directly to what the solution is. When it comes to what we like and what we admire, we like symmetry, but we don't like perfect symmetry. A perfectly symmetrical face is somehow a disturbing or off-putting to us. It seems completely unsurprising to me that people, when telling a story, that they're willing to exaggerate or engage in a little hyperbole, etc. We know from a child, from the time that you're starting to interact with other children, you learn how to tell stories in such a way that people find them more compelling. And the stories need flaws. Otherwise, it's just too perfect. And so it's hardly unsurprising to me that there would be flaws in the story when we're talking about flawed human beings.
Gotcha. And thanks for your question from Sentinel Apologetics. Says, theology is as important as the scientific method. Paul says that the cross is necessary since God isn't a hypocrite in regards to sin. Romans 3.
I guess, is that from Matt?
Was it a question?
Yeah, it's more of a statement. Let's see. But next up, let's see. Michael Simonelli, thanks for your question, says, how does Jonathan know that the claims he's using to assert the biblical figures are trustworthy are true?
I'm not quite sure I understand that question. I thought I had already outlined that. I think that there's there are numerous categories of evidence which cumulatively bear on the substantial trustworthiness of the gospel accounts, including undesigned coincidences, extra-biblical corroborations, unexplained allusions, oral similarities, and so forth, expressive silence. And although we don't have time to get into all those, I think the argument is that cumulatively those provide substantial support for the general reliability of the gospel accounts. And therefore, when the gospels assert something to be true, that provides a basis for trusting that to be true, even if we don't have direct evidence for that particular fact, and unless there's evidence to the contrary, of course.
Yeah, I think the objection.
That is a correct answer. It's about the 17th time that you've had to say this thing in this debate, but a simpler answer would be the same way we do any historical claim. Boom. So just keep it tight. And that actually echoes something that Matt claimed, though he doesn't live up to it very well, which is he claimed he doesn't have a double standard, just one standard. Right. Good. One standard, we tell that these are true claims the same way that we tell any other historical claims are true. We do it by examining the evidence in detail. I've already given you all my categories before, but if they did not hear Moses and the prophets and your first 16 iterations of all the categories of evidence, then they will not hear them. No, not even if one should rise from the dead.
If I'm going to try to interpret what they're asking, is that on several occasions, including just now, I've heard Jonathan say extra biblical evidence, extra biblical support, and yet there's nothing about his case that was extra biblical at all.
Gotcha. And thanks for your question. This one comes in from, let's see, I'm going to paraphrase this, Michael, because it's just, a lot of it's kind of redundant from a last question, but it's like a follow-up. They said, for Matt, they said, if claims being evidence is context dependent, then isn't it true that claims can be evidence?
No, it's not the claim that's the evidence. It's the context that becomes the evidence.
Gotcha.
I don't know why this is any different. Here, let me do it differently. A proposition is never evidence. Maybe that's the distinction we need to make. That when Jonathan hears someone making a claim, what he hears is someone of this character in this setting with these factors made this proposition, and then adding those things in as evidence for the proposition, the character of the person. Maybe that's it. But I could be wrong, because if I say propositions aren't evidence, for all I know, Jonathan's going to say, yes, they are.
The problem here is that as soon as he redefines his statement to be propositions are not evidence rather than claims or testimony are not evidence, then it loses its relevance to the debate, right? Because the statement's fine, but just is not relevant anymore.
Right, exactly. I think we covered that a little earlier. He's just kind of recapitulating what he's said before. But even so, I mean, you know, I guess I agree and don't agree in one sense. It's that the content matters. So, you know, who cares how we're packaging it? There are connections between, there are logical connections between propositions. And so we care about the content. But yeah, like you said, if he wants to be dismissive like that, then right, it loses relevance.
I don't know.
Gotcha. And S.J. Thomason said, Peter denied Jesus 3 times. Paul jailed Christians. James, brother of Jesus, tried to stop his ministry. Then they saw the risen Christ, preached for him for decades, and were martyred. Best explanation from Matt and Jonathan.
Prove it. Prove any of what you just said. You can't.
So again, I don't think he knows what proof means. I mean, proof means that you have proof really only arises in pure mathematics and deductive logic, and even in deductive logic, you only have proof if the premises are true. And so how are you supposed to prove something historical? Well, you can't, but you can provide evidence that makes the conclusion justified in believing and warranted and compelled because the evidence is sufficient relative to the pertaining prior probability.
Yes, it's very easy in a setting like that to ask for proof when, in principle we can't, because that's not what historical claims hinge upon.
Gotcha. I think we have an idea that I think we know where Jonathan stands. Definitely, let's see, we only have just maybe 2 more. Thanks, Red Knight 821, who said, why would the disciples preach a lie for no reason and have the Romans hate them? Why would the early Christians start a religion that would get them killed?
Why would anybody start a religion that might get them killed? Do you think Christianity is the only religion that was persecuted or treated harshly by the people in the surroundings? That's such a flawed line of reasoning. There's nothing else to say.
The point here is that the fact that the disciples were willing to suffer persecution, trials, tribulations, even martyrdom, is evidence that contributes to the cumulative case for the disciples being sincere in their claim to have actually witnessed with their eyes and handled with their hands the risen Christ. And so it is evidence that disconfirms one of the alternative competing explanations, namely that the apostles were setting out to deceive people. When we're talking about religious people who are undergoing persecution in other religions, it's generally the case that they are not witnesses in a position to know whether the claims that they're proclaiming are true or not. So there's a category difference, I think, that Matt is not making.
Yep.
Thanks again for listening to this review series, commenting on my recent debate with Matt Dillahunty on the evidence for the resurrection of Jesus. I've been Jonathan McLatchie, and I've been in conversation with Dr. Timothy McGrew and Richard Porter.